27 enemy destroyer ships cut through the ocean, hunting one target. Against overwhelming firepower, radar locks, and steel closing in from every direction, one ship stood alone. No reinforcements, no escape route. Every military rule said one thing: run. But instead of retreating, this commander did the unthinkable. He turned his ship around, straight into the jaws of destruction. What followed wasn't just a naval battle. It became a lesson in courage, strategy, and defiance that still shocks historians today. Before we dive into this unbelievable true story, like this video to support historical storytelling. Subscribe to the channel for more real war documentaries, and comment below. Where are you watching from? Your support helps keep these stories alive. The ocean that morning was calm, deceptively calm. A wide stretch of steel blue water rolled gently under a pale sky, hiding the violence that was about to erupt. At the center of it all was a single warship, isolated and exposed. Its radar screens glowed softly, picking up faint signals at first, then stronger ones. One contact, then 5, then 10. By the time the officer of the watch confirmed the count, the truth hit hard. 27 enemy destroyers were closing in. Destroyers were not small patrol boats. They were fast, heavily armed, designed specifically to hunt and kill ships like this one. Each carried long-range guns, torpedoes, depth charges, and trained crews hardened by battle. Against one ship, 27 destroyers meant certainty. Certainty of pursuit, certainty of overwhelming fire, certainty of destruction. Inside the bridge, tension thickened the air. Crew members exchanged brief glances. No panic, but no illusions either. They knew the math, they knew the odds. Standard naval doctrine was clear. When outnumbered this badly, survival depended on escape, using speed, smoke screens, and evasive maneuvers to disappear into open water. The engines were ready. The course to retreat was clear. All that remained was the command. But the man in charge didn't speak immediately. The commander stood still, studying the plot table and radar returns. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't driven by ego. He understood exactly what he was facing. And that was precisely why his next decision would change everything. These 27 destroyers weren't just hunting randomly. They were protecting something. Supply routes, troop movements, or a strategic corridor the enemy could not afford to lose. If this lone ship ran, the destroyers would simply continue their mission. But if it stayed, the commander realized something crucial. Numbers alone didn't guarantee victory. Coordination did. 27 ships meant crowded maneuvering space, conflicting firing solutions, limited visibility, and a dangerous reliance on formation discipline. A single aggressive ship could turn that advantage into chaos. The order came quietly, but it froze the bridge. Alter course. The helmsman hesitated for half a second. Turned toward them. No speech, no dramatics, just a decision. The bow slowly swung around, pointing directly at the incoming enemy formation. Down in the engine room, power increased. Not for retreat, but for attack speed. Crew members moved with sharpened focus. Guns were manned. Torpedo crews double-checked settings. Damage control teams prepared for the worst, knowing that once firing began, there might be no second chance. On the enemy side, radar operators noticed the change. The lone ship wasn't running. It was coming straight at them. Confusion rippled through the destroyer screen. Why would a single vessel charge an entire flotilla? Was it bait, a decoy, or was something else hidden beyond the horizon? That hesitation, just seconds long, was all the commander needed. He ordered maximum smoke deployment, not to flee, but to divide. Thick white clouds spread across the water, breaking visual contact and fragmenting the enemy formation. Then the first gun spoke. Not wildly, not desperately. Each shot was measured, deliberate, aimed to disable radar, damage superstructures, and force enemy ships to maneuver independently. One destroyer veered away. Another slowed suddenly to avoid collision. Radio chatter exploded as formations broke down. The hunter pack was no longer a single force. It was becoming 27 separate problems. And this was only the beginning. The smoke hung over the sea like a living thing. What had been a clean, organized pursuit only minutes earlier was now fractured into confusion. Enemy destroyers disappeared and reappeared in patches of white haze, their silhouettes distorted, distances misjudged, firing solutions uncertain. This was exactly what the commander wanted. He knew something most people forget about naval warfare. The ocean magnifies mistakes. Inside the smokescreen, the lone ship shifted course again, not randomly, but sharply. Short, unpredictable turns, speed changes time to the second. Every movement designed to keep the enemy guessing. The first enemy destroyer emerged from the smoke too close, far closer than expected. Its gun swung around, but the angle was wrong. Before it could correct, a precise volley struck its forward superstructure. Not a killing blow, but enough. Radar went dark. Fire control systems failed. The destroyers slowed, drifting out of the fight. One down, not destroyed, but neutralized. And that distinction mattered. The commander wasn't trying to sink 27 ships outright. He was trying to break the system that made them dangerous. Another destroyer rushed in from the flank, firing blindly through the smoke. Shells splashed wide, exploding uselessly in open water. The lone ship answered with controlled bursts, forcing the attacker to turn away to avoid collision with its own allies. Now, two enemy ships were maneuvering independently. Their formation discipline was unraveling. On enemy radios, confusion spread. Orders overlapped. Coordinates conflicted. Warnings came too late. Each destroyer captain saw only fragments of the battlefield, never the whole picture. But the lone commander saw something else. He saw gaps. Moments when destroyers crossed each other's paths. Moments when torpedo lanes were blocked by friendly hulls. Moments when aggressive movement became impossible without risking collision. Then came the torpedoes. Not a full spread. Just enough. The commander launched them into the densest cluster, not aiming for guaranteed hits, but forcing reactions. Enemy ships broke hard to avoid the threat. Some turned away completely, abandoning firing positions. Others slowed to reassess. One torpedo struck true. A violent explosion tore into the side of a destroyer, ripping open its hull. Flames shot skyward. The ship listed heavily, crew scrambling to control flooding. It wasn't sinking immediately, but it was finished as a combat vessel. The psychological effect was instant. This was no longer a chase. This was a fight they hadn't expected. Enemy commanders now faced an uncomfortable reality. The longer they stayed crowded together, the more vulnerable they became. And the longer they hesitated, the more control the lone ship gained. But the battle was far from over. A coordinated response finally began to form. Several destroyers pulled back, regrouping outside the smoke. Their guns elevated, preparing to rain fire from distance rather than close in. This was dangerous. Long-range gunfire meant the lone ship could no longer rely on confusion alone. A lucky hit could cripple engines, jam the rudder, or knock out main guns. The commander knew the window was closing. He made his boldest move yet. Instead of pulling away, he charged straight toward the regrouping destroyers, breaking through the thinning smoke at full speed. Enemy spotters were stunned. No hesitation. No defensive posture, just relentless forward momentum. At close range, accuracy returned, but so did risk. Shells screamed overhead. One slammed into the water meters from the hull, drenching the deck. Another tore through an antenna mast, cutting communications temporarily. Damage control teams moved instantly. Lines were rerouted, fires were smothered. The ship stayed in the fight. Then the guns spoke again. This time, targets were chosen carefully. Lead ships, command vessels, anything that looked like it was trying to coordinate the rest. One destroyer took a hit to its bridge. Another lost propulsion. The enemy force was bleeding capability, piece by piece. 27 ships were still afloat, but they were no longer 27 hunters. They were scattered survivors of a plan that had collapsed. And the commander knew if he pushed just a little harder, the balance could tip completely. By now, the sea was no longer calm. Smoke drifted in torn layers. Burning fuel left dark scars on the water. Wrecked radar masts and twisted metal marked where confidence had once ruled. The lone ship was damaged, but alive. Enemy destroyers circled at distance, no longer charging blindly. They had learned. Their commanders understood now that aggression alone wouldn't work. This ship wasn't running because it didn't need to. It was thinking, and that made it dangerous. Inside the bridge, reports came in fast. Minor flooding, contained, one gun temporarily out of action, rerouted. Communications partially restored. Every problem had a solution. Every solution bought time. But time was running out. A new threat appeared on the radar. Several destroyers moving wide, attempting a pincer maneuver. This time they were coordinating, spreading out, preparing to trap the lone ship in overlapping fire. This was the scenario no commander wanted. Smoke wouldn't help anymore. Speed alone wouldn't save them. And ammunition was no longer unlimited. The crew knew it too. Faces were streaked with sweat and smoke. Hands shook, not from fear, but exhaustion. Every man on board understood that they had already pushed beyond expectation. One mistake now, and the ocean would take them. The commander studied the chart one last time. He saw something the enemy hadn't fully considered. Their numbers had forced them wide. Their caution had created distance, and distance created vulnerability. He gave the order. All power forward, straight through the gap. The helmsman's eyes widened. Between two clusters of destroyers lay a narrow corridor, barely wide enough to pass. Enemy guns began turning, realizing too late what was happening. The lone ship surged ahead. Shells exploded around it. Water towers rose on both sides. A hit slammed into the hull. Metal screamed, lights flickered, but the engines held. They were through, now behind the enemy's main line. And suddenly, the hunters were facing the wrong direction. Confusion returned instantly. Destroyers tried to turn, but turning takes time. Space.coordination, and they had none. The lone ship fired again, this time at exposed sterns, unprotected systems, propulsion components never meant to face an attacker. One destroyer slowed sharply, another veered off, trailing smoke. A third collided with a damaged ally in the chaos. Enemy radios filled with emergency calls, requests for orders, requests for assistance, requests that could not be answered. The commander didn't celebrate, he pressed. Torpedoes launched at close range, deadly now. One struck beneath a destroyer's midsection, breaking its back. Another detonated near the engine room of a second ship, silencing it completely. The battlefield had changed again. What had begun as a confident pursuit was now a desperate attempt to disengage. Enemy ships started pulling away, not as a tactic, but as a necessity. Some were damaged, some were low on ammunition. Some simply didn't know who was in command anymore. The realization spread quietly, but unmistakably. Continuing this fight meant unacceptable losses. And, for the first time since the chase began, the enemy turned away. Not all at once, not formally, but ship by ship, the destroyers broke contact. The ocean slowly reclaimed the noise. The lone ship did not pursue. Its mission was complete. Silence settled over the deck, broken only by the hum of engines and the distant crackle of fires dying out. Crew members leaned against railings, barely believing they were still standing. Some laughed quietly, others simply stared at the horizon. They had faced 27 destroyers, and they were still here. The commander finally allowed himself a breath. This wasn't victory in the traditional sense. No flags raised, no cheers broadcast across the sea. But it was something far rarer. It was proof that discipline, intelligence, and courage could bend the outcome of history, if only for a few hours on an open ocean. And long after the smoke faded, naval strategists would study this battle for one reason: because it never should have been possible. As the last enemy destroyer faded into the distance, the sea finally grew quiet. Not the peaceful silence of safety, but the heavy stillness that follows survival. Smoke drifted away with the wind. Small fires were extinguished one by one. Damage control teams moved methodically through the ship, checking compartments, sealing ruptures, accounting for every man. The lone ship was battered. Its paint was scorched. Its hull bore the scars of near misses and direct hits. But it was still afloat. And more importantly, it was still operational. Casualty reports came in, a few wounded, none lost. In naval warfare, that alone was remarkable. The commander gathered his officers. There was no celebration, no dramatic speech, only quiet acknowledgement of what had just happened. Every person in that room understood how narrow the margin had been. One wrong turn, one delayed order, one lucky enemy shell, any of it could have ended differently. Later, when reports reached higher command, disbelief was the first response. 27 destroyers had pursued a single ship. Multiple enemy vessels were damaged or disabled. The pursuit had failed. At first, analysts assumed missing information. Perhaps friendly support had intervened, or air cover had played a role. But as logs were reviewed and enemy accounts examined, the truth became clear. This had been a fight decided not by firepower but by decision-making. Naval strategists took note. The engagement became a case study in asymmetrical naval combat. How speed, positioning, smoke, and controlled aggression could dismantle a numerically superior force. More importantly, it exposed a critical flaw in overconfidence. Numbers can intimidate, they can dominate, but they can also create dependence on formation, on communication, on predictability. The lone commander had attacked that dependence. By forcing the enemy to react instead of plan, he had taken away their greatest advantage. Years later, war colleges would teach this engagement not as a miracle, but as a lesson. That leadership under pressure matters more than hardware. That initiative can outweigh orders. And that sometimes survival demands doing the opposite of what doctrine suggests. As for the crew, they returned to duty with little fanfare. No grand parade, no headlines. Most of them never spoke publicly about the battle. To them, it wasn't legend. It was a day when training, trust, and instinct had been tested to their limits. But history remembers moments like this for a reason, because they remind us that war is not only fought by fleets and weapons, but by individuals making impossible choices in seconds. One crew chose to fight instead of surrender to odds, and 27 ships learned that dominance is never guaranteed. On today's oceans, navies still plan for overwhelming force, but somewhere in those doctrines lies a quiet footnote. A reminder born from this encounter: never assume the enemy will behave as expected, because sometimes the most dangerous move is the one no one believes you'd dare to make. And that is why this story still matters. Not because of destruction, not because of victory counts, but because it proves that courage, clarity, and calculated defiance can change outcomes, even when logic says they shouldn't.